Okay, so let's get into our question. When I started my business, I created a website that over the past 7 years has gained some good SEO. I want to rebrand my business, including a name change, which would mean that I need to redo my website, but I'm nervous about losing any established SEO cred. My questions are, one, is this a valid concern? And two,
Yes.
who do I turn to for support to make sure that I'm doing this correctly? In other words, I get a little confused. Who do I hire for this stuff? An SEO expert, a website designer, a website developer? What's even the difference between all of those incredible people? So let's start with number one.
Six. Okay, so I'm grateful because you sent me this so I could prepare and I know the order in which the question was answered. So you want to rebrand your business, which is fantastic. If you already have some authority on your website, that's really great, right? Especially if the rebrand is a rebrand, not a pivot. If you're like, this is the name of my business before I got married and now I'm married and I changed my last name. I think you and I talked about name changes. Like if it's just a name change and you're not also adjusting your services, this can be a pretty straightforward process. But we will see a drop in your SEO because Google attributes your authority to your domain. So if you're at brookm.com versus brookmonahan.com, like Google doesn't know that that's the same .com, that you're the same person. Right. So what Google thinks about is what's the authority attached to that domain. Before I rebranded my SEO agency to Love at First Search, I had it under a personal sort of superhero brand called Megabolt Digital. And basically, I took all the same information that was on my page and just went like, here's the Megabolt Digital page. And then I took the domain and went, now we're calling it Love at First Search. And when you set it up that way, when you migrate, when you switch the domain, but you don't move anything, you don't change anything, it's just the domain, then there is a little bit of a dip in your SEO as Google's like, oh, it used to be called this, but now it's called this. And the new name doesn't have that history. But if you hire the right person to make that change for you, it's really more of like a change of address form than it is a move, right? It's like going to the post office and saying, I was at the corner of Main and State, and now I want my address to be 1 Main instead of 1 State, but you're not changing that much. So the post office can still send you mail. But often when people do rebrands, they change a lot of shit too, right? Where you're like, I used to have this thing, but as long as I'm going through this rebrand process, it's not just going to be, I'm going to change my brand colors. It's also going to be, I'm going to make a pivot. When that happens, we have to be careful about not just changing the domain, because if you're just changing the domain and you're saying, all the mail that went to this address now goes to this address, you may lose a couple envelopes and stuff, but it's not like Google still won't understand if you're pointing all the same traffic to the same place. Okay, you'll pick up some of those backlinks, you'll pick up some of that authority. But once we start to change the copy on the page, once we start to change the services on the page, once we start to go, oh, well, that blog post isn't relevant anymore, so I'm just going to take it down. This is where you need to do probably some sort of audit of what's working on your existing site so that as you make those changes, you can either maintain or improve the traffic that's already coming to your website. So I'm trying to come up with an example off the top of my head. I didn't prepare this much. But let's say that you have a blog that's like, it's kicking ass. It's bringing in a ton of traffic for you. And then you're like, well, that's not really relevant to what I do anymore. So I'm just going to delete it while I'm going through this rebrand. Then as you're, or I'm going to rename it and I'm going to move it. If you don't set up a redirect, if you don't give Google, like, this is where you used to have this information and now it's moved here, then Google thinks that it's gone forever. So if you're just rebranding and all you're doing is changing your domain, that actually isn't that complicated. You can go into your domain server, you can change your name servers. It's like maybe a 10-minute process for a web developer, for somebody who knows what they're doing. and I'll talk in a minute about designers, developers, SEOs, right?
Yes.
If you're redoing everything, then the first step is I want you to do an audit of what's working so that way you don't lose any of what you've already spent all this time creating, this credibility.
Right.
Take some of that information about what's working. You know, you can go into your Google Analytics, your Google Search Console. You can hire somebody to help you with this, but take a look at what's working. What are your existing keywords? What are the pages that are bringing in traffic? And map out on my old website, here's what was working. And I want to make sure that that information transfers over to my new website. And if there's a phrase that does really well for me on my old website, I want to make sure that that phrase appears in the copy of my new website. I want to almost like map out what was working and then make sure that each of the things that's working on the old website carries over into the new one.
So you're saying make sure that, so if you have a blog post that's performing really well, like make sure that that blog post is still living under the, or at least the keywords that you're using for that blog post, or like something related to that blog post with like the words that are working really well, is living on the new website, under the new domain.
And it's clear that it's gone. So if you're just going like, okay, I'm moving from WordPress to WordPress and I'm taking this, you know, this existing website and just changing the URL of the domain, but everything else is fine, then you might at like a site level be able to be like, well, it used to be ABC and now it's xyz.com.
Right.
That shouldn't be too problematic. But
if you're building like, a whole new site,
if you're building a whole new website, and then you flip the switch and it goes from, you know, dead to alive. You're like Frankenstein bringing this thing to life, right? When you do that, you need to be careful, because if you're like, I'm just going to copy paste all this stuff from my old website to my new website without taking down the old website, then it's going to look like you're plagiarizing yourself. Or if you move over half of it, but you're like, oh, I'll move over the second half later, then if you don't, you know, export import correctly, then you could potentially like lose all the traffic for the things that haven't been imported. Or if you're like, I was on WordPress, but now I want to be on Squarespace, and all of Squarespace blogs have like domain.com/blog/this, and they import and all of those permalinks have changed, then it looks like it's all brand new content. So I'm giving you the worst case scenarios here, because I do want to strike a little bit of fear of God into you when you're doing this and say, hire a professional.
Yes. Okay. I'm scared.
Hire a professional, because the timing of this is really important. When you turn the power off on one house and turn the power on the other house, we want to make sure that the furniture has moved.
Right. Now I happen to know, I'm going to keep this person anonymous, but I do know who submitted this question. And I do know that in this person's case, this is not going to be a pivot. This is going to be literally a name change and a domain change. And like, they might change some things on the website, but the website is going to stay. But I like that we are going into the other options, because I am in the middle of a pivot. So I'm just like selfishly sitting here, like, and then also
give me all the information.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't even have good SEO, so I don't know what I'm scared of, but keep going. Keep going. I'm glad you're here. We're going to be okay.
So,
you're here.
Let's talk about those 3 professionals that you could hire here.
Yes.
Okay, so this person specifically said, I don't know who to hire. Should I hire an SEO person, a web designer, a website developer? I want to talk about the differences between those.
Great.
I'm an SEO person.
Yes.
I care about what's the structure of your pages? What's the, you know, what are your permalinks looking like so that Google can send them to the right places? How are things linked between them? What are all your keywords? Like, I care about that side of things, and like, how quickly does your page load so that way Google doesn't send to a page that takes 8 minutes to load on mobile, right? Like, I care about how the experience is for people coming to your website from search engines, and I care about how easy it is to navigate so that way Google's little crawler robots can find what they're looking for. Before I was an SEO person, I was a website designer. as a website designer, I was like, all right, I'm in WordPress and I need to make sure that this background color is the same as the brand colors, and these words show up in this place, and this image looks really clear. But I wasn't necessarily thinking about things like page speed, load time, and menu structure, and like that kind of thing. I was like, I want to make this beautiful, and I want to make it something that people want to read.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the difference. Some web designers know some SEO. Some SEO people can make things that are beautiful. There's not always an overlap here in the Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm.
Web developers aren't looking at how pretty things are. They are making sure that they work very functionally.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people are developers and designers. Designers make things that look beautiful. Developers make things that are structurally strong. It's like almost like an architect versus an interior designer.
Right.
Like architects can build you, they can, I used to work in an architecture firm, so I tend to go back and forth on this stuff. Architects can build you a blueprint that is like, or like almost like a structural engineer versus an architect, where it's like, I want to make sure that this building stands up. I want to make sure that when people move through, there are no doors into rooms that don't exist, right? Like, developers make things run smoothly. Designers make them beautiful.
Right.
And the SEO people make sure that there's a mailbox outside that has a phone number in front of it so you can find it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for your question submitter, they might just need a developer to go into the, domain hosting service and flip a switch from a custom name server to a different custom name server, and bloop.
Mm-hmm.
Within 4 hours, it's all done.
Mm-hmm.
That developer probably costs you, I don't know, $100 to $200 an hour, and it can be done, and you don't have to think about it again, and it's done correctly.
Yeah.
If you're doing some of that other stuff where you're like, I want to make sure that as I move from this place to this place, you can hire someone like me, an SEO person, who will do that auditing and be like, all right, let's also make sure that this moves here and this moves here, and let's map out the things, and let's do the customer experience and all that.
Uh-huh.
But then I'm not going to be the one who goes in and I'm like, oh, let me recode your website.
Right.
To set up the HT access in the text, robots.txt files. That's a developer. That's my like structural engineer guy. Yep. So you might need all three of those people if you're doing a complete brand overhaul. You might need the SEO person to make sure that the traffic continues to move to your website. You might need the designer to make sure that it looks great, that it looks like something that people want, that it's functional, that the user experience is good. And you might need the developer to make it work really well.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to recap what you said and make sure that I understand it, because then we can make sure that our listeners understand. Okay, so for the person who is submitting this question, who I'm pretty sure is just going to be changing their name and thus changing their domain, that might be as simple as you go into where you ever, like you're hosting
GoDaddy or whatever.
Yeah, like I use Hover, I think, or you might have done it through Squarespace or something like that. I don't know. And you're just changing, you're getting a new domain, and you are just literally changing the domain that links to the existing website. And there might be a dip because Google has to catch up with the fact that this is now changing. Like it doesn't know, right? That credibility that you built up around that old domain, Google has to kind of catch up with the fact that all of that stuff is on a new domain. It's like you're having to rebuild that a little bit, but like it's already set up in a way that works. So like you can expect it to catch back up.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
And like you might also, you definitely also want to say like that old domain, everyone that sends traffic to that old domain, we want to send it to the new domain. So you might have to set up a redirect. You might have to call it a parked domain. I can't remember all the different terminology because I'm not a web developer.
Got it. Okay. So if you need help with that, that's going to be a web developer, but you don't really need to worry that much. There's going to be a dip, but it's going to pan out and you know what you have to do. So you might just have to bite that bullet. But if you are pivoting, or if you are rebuilding a totally new website, then what you want to do to not have all of your SEO cred vanish is audit what is actually working and what about your website is actually working well with the SEO. What people are finding you through, what pages maybe they're landing on, like what's working really well. And you want to make sure that you are incorporating that into the new website. And an SEO person is going to be the person who's going to help you do that and help you map all of that out so that you can then bring it to your web developer who helps you with the new website, not designing the new website, but creating the structure of the new website to make sure that all of that is included and in the right places. I don't even know what the terminology is for that because that's not what I do. And that's not what Meg does, but they're going to bring it to life. So Meg is going to like SEO, architect, design the whole thing. And then you're going to bring it to your engineer developer who's going to be like, here's how we actually make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And if, as you're doing that redesign, you're like, I want to change the colors. I want to make the page look different. I want to make sure that this, you know, that the call to action buttons get to this place. That's when you might hire a designer. So the SEO person's in our metaphor, it might be the architect who's thinking about where things go.
Mm-hmm.
The developer is the structural engineer who makes sure that everything actually works and that the plumbing's in the right places. I mean, the architect doesn't worry about that too. You know, but that actually wouldn't be the structural engineer. That would be the mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineer. But
The point is,
and then you bring in somebody who's like, this is the wall color that I want.
yes,
This is how I want this. This is where I want the bed to go. Right? It's three
great.
different things, but they all work together to make sure that you have a
Great.
beautiful house.
And it might be that there's some overlap, but at least now you know the questions to ask to find the right
Mhm.
person. Because if somebody says, yeah, I'm a designer, but I'm also like a developer, like you can run this by them and say like, okay, well, here's a situation with the SEO and here's what I've gotten from this audit that I've done. And I really want to make sure that all of this carries over. Like, do you know how to do all of that in the back end to make sure that whatever, you know what questions to ask to make sure that they are at the level that you need them to be at to maintain your cred.
And if you're not sure, ask around, because all of us who are doing this know people who do it. Agencies are more likely to be able to have everyone in-house, but like I even, you know, I'll share a blog post with you so that you can put in here that I wrote that was like,
cool.
Here are these different scenarios, with lists to like, here are my preferred developers. So, you know, if you need a developer, don't call me, but if you need someone to do the SEO audit before you go to a developer, let's have a conversation.
Yes.
And even if you have a developer and you're like, I just want somebody who is only focused on this, you can hire somebody for like an hour to just review your stuff, right?
There you
and
go.
Be kind of in your back pocket. So it doesn't have to be all the people.
Yeah. And y'all, I'm just going to say this because sometimes I say like, oh yeah, no, you're going to want this person to do that. And I see the people get scared because they're like, I have to pay all of these people and whatever. It's not that expensive. People will pay like 10 grand to join a mastermind and are like scared to hire a lawyer. And I'm like get your priorities in check, you know, like you got it's really not that expensive.
You can hire me for like a half an hour to talk you through this for your own website for like 150, $200. Like it doesn't always have to be, you have to hire somebody to do it. Sometimes you want somebody to come up and be like, here's the plan for you. And people will usually do that, you know?
And maybe you do have to pay a couple grand for one of these things, but like if the reason that you're in a bunch of programs that cost more than that is because you're trying to motivate yourself to do the work, and then you could just take that money and pay someone else to do the work and do it right and get it done. I'm just saying it might be easier. Like I am a coach, so I think that all of that stuff is great, but I'm just saying like sometimes you need to just go and find the person who's right for the job and just fork over $500 and just get it done right and move on with your life.
You don't need to know how all this works. You need to have somebody who can do it for you sometimes.
And focus on your own work. Or maybe you heard everything that Meg just said and you were like, oh, got it. Yeah, I know how to do all of that. Great.
Cool.
Perfect. Go for it. Meg, this was so much fun.
Yeah, sorry for getting really deep, but it's a deep question, right? Like there's a lot of different nuances.
Oh no, I took it there. I always take us there. That's the whole point of this podcast.
So we don't need to gloss over any of this. We can just go dig right in.
Yes, that's what I want to do, because I know that people ask questions and then they hear like these are the 3 steps. And you're like, but what about the 75 steps of step 1 that you didn't talk about?
And like,
you know?
What are the variations and how is this different if this is the case? Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to link that blog post. If you want to go and find Meg, I'm going to put all the information in the show notes, including the link right to that blog post. I can tell everybody listening, the reason that I hunted Meg down to answer this question and risked being annoying because I was convinced that I was being annoying, which you're not alone, is because I personally have everything that I don't know that much about SEO, but what I do know, I learned from Meg's free resources. They're awesome. And if you're reading those and you're like, this does not do it for me, I am not the kind of person who wants to do this, then just hire her and then she can do it for you.
But that's pretty much how we work now, is free resources and done with you support. I want people to understand sort of how this works, but not have to figure out how the sausage is made.
Yeah. This was so much fun. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and knowledge and wisdom. And I cannot wait to see you again.
And now that I know that you're doing this, just shoot me a message or a Voxer when you have another question and we'll just hop on and record it. Yes, now that I know to look for it, now it'll be easy.
I can't wait. I'm excited. All right.
Thanks, Brooke.